I assume you can still hear me, right? Yeah, so brothers and sisters, we are reading now. I'm just gonna recap for the people for the audience out there. We are reading chapter 3 of Neo-Colonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism, by Kwame Nkrumah. This chapter is called Imperialist Finance. Very interesting chapter. Anyway, now we're at page 37. Both of you follow me, I assume, and you can hear me. So, first of all, in the chapter, Kwame Nkrumah starts by pointing out the struggle between imperialists and capitalists struggle against socialism and African liberation movements. Here he lets us know, as he has let us know in the preface of the book, that Lenin wrote that imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. He traced the latecomers, aka, latecomers to imperialism, aka Germany is USA, to be the ones who actually formed cartels and syndicates before the early quote-unquote OG imperialists or colonial rulers such as France and Britain and so on, which brought them even sooner to monopoly capitalism, meaning that, they were, they were like behind the scene, and now all of a sudden there was like this new stage in the capitalism which they could just, come in and swoop in without anybody noticing, you could say. I mean, that's just my interpretation, right? So, then he goes on to talk about monopoly capitalism, which has led to international co-fraternity. And what does international co-fraternity mean? It means that basically it's like kind of like what we have today with NATO alliance, right? Like, so these different, uh, you know, you could say heads of these monopolies, corporations, but at the same time, they're not heads of these corporations, you get me? They have like the symbiosis, and they kind of made an alliance against the ones who don't want this monopoly, you could say. And then Kwame Nkrumah, can you guys hear me, by the way? Just write something in the voice chat. Yeah, perfect. So he then goes on to talk about the competitive character of capitalism that has led to natural conflict between European and American finance and industry. And if you guys know anything, one of the main tenets of capitalism is competition, right? So that means that, yeah, competition leads to more, what do you call it? Yeah, mm, yeah, conflict. And this competitive nature or inherent competitive nature of capitalism, uh, like manifests itself uh, through which there was like these, world wars. Yeah, and World War One created a break for the socialist state, aka the creation of the first socialist state called USSR, which led to the loss for the global monopoly capitalism because there was like, 1/6 of the earth, as Kwame Nkrumah points out, in which, what do you call it? In which, yeah, in which these global corporations, aka, the capitalist monopolies, couldn't have access to these resources that was, which was, part of this huge land called Russia at that time, which later became Soviet Union. And this led to, of course, naturally, to a defensive struggle against socialism as an ideology, uh, because 1/6 of the world's surface was withdrawn with, Soviet Union surfacing. And apparently, what Kwame Nkrumah here points out to is, welcome, Teknio, by the way. What Kwame Nkrumah here points to is that, you know, because of this, what do you call it? Because of all these resources that were by that time under, Russia, which later became Soviet Union, led to all these different, empires and conglomerates who worked together at that time to work against Russia at that time and to isolate it. And this was back in like the 1918s. And this book by Kwame Nkrumah is written in the 1960s. And if you know anything about today with Russia and what's going on, you could kind of draw a parallel between the isolation policy of that time and till today, where Russia has become smaller, even though it's a huge swathe of land, it's still smaller. Anyway, so and then other things were encouraged by the highest stage or the highest stage of capitalism, which was fascism, which was encouraged to prop up capitalism. And it was especially bolstered in like this, what Kwame Nkrumah called the semi-colonial appendages to the West, which were Portugal and Spain. Even though Portugal and Spain were, big empires back in the days, by the start of 1900s, they were falling behind, United Kingdom and, other much more powerful entities. So what happened afterwards was that the West couldn't cope with the arrival of Second World War II, or World War II, and the colonial subjects of the West started to gain confidence, which led to a lot of independence movements, as we know it today, that started actually, by the 1930s, 40s, which led to, in the 50s, where a lot of different African countries gained or started to gain independence in the late 50s, you could say, but the process started already by World War II, right? Because, these peripheries of the colonialists, they noticed, oh, okay, these European powers, they actually don't have that much power when they're just, inter-invading themselves, and we're just here by the by the sidelines, right? I think that was part of the reasons of why there were like so many independence movements, besides, the support for the independence movements by the socialist camp, like, back then Soviet Union, which was the most powerful one, and China and so on. Yeah. Uh, and this created like when there was like this, the independent movements, this created a new front against the imperial powers, or what you would call the capitalist, the capitalist core, and it was created like an alliance between the colonized and socialist camp against the colonialist camp. So if we turn to page 39, there's an interesting perspective that, what do you call it, that Kwame Nkrumah comes with, and it's that with the new stage of capitalism, uh, the world saw an advance in war machinery, raw materials, and chemical productions because of capital surplus, but also because there was a need to advance, capitalism, because that's what it wants, to extract minerals and to refine, not because of, for the good of the rest of the world, but simply because, to advance itself and its own rulers. And afterwards, this created a challenge of colonized socialist camp withdrawal, which led to the death trial of capitalism. I'm using Kwame Nkrumah's words here, by the way, but I think you understand what I mean, by the way. Yeah, comrade sister. Yeah, so the European main capitalists, aka mega corporations, passed the throne to American corporations after World War II, because as you have seen with World War II, all European countries have been, paralyzed and destroyed beyond repair. Where America was, enjoying behind the scene. They didn't even join in the war. They joined much later, at like the end, almost at the end of World War II, which meant that America could just relax and continue developing, and because there was no other contenders to to its position. It could just accumulate wealth and lend to other countries support and the support that America sent at that time in World War II when they joined. The support they sent, like for example, you know, tractors and whatnot to repair these countries, reconstruction and so on. They actually lended these things. They never donated anything. And UK first started to pay back everything after the World War reconstruction back in 2006. And this is a quote unquote rich country we're talking about. Yeah. So yeah. And in the imperial core, there was like some kind of a thing called the capitalists started to realize that they had to concede some quote unquote crumbs, as Kwame Nkrumah called it, to the working class in the imperial core, especially to trade unions and politicians. This is basically what we call social democracy today, right? Like where, for example, Scandinavian countries are, giving some concessions to the working class, if you get me. Like you get like some kind of, yeah, you get free education and some uh, okay living standards, but at the expense of, of imperialism, meaning that the spoils of empire come to them, If you look at, for example, South Africa, which is also a quote unquote social democracy, it's like one of the most unequal societies and has a very low growth rate at the moment because social democracy can only be sustained by imperialism, as you can see here. Uneven development of capitalism led to new players and ultimately world wars. And there was like a new dogma in the Cold War that Kwame Nkrumah is mentioning, which was fight for democracy, right? Yeah, they were saying, uh, yeah, like we're fighting for democracy, just like they're doing today, like, oh, we want to bring democracy to Libya or Iraq, but in reality, they are just, they want to maintain their domination of, the periphery, you could say, the peripheries of the world. If we then turn to the page 40, actually this started at page 40, that talk about fight for democracy. It's very interesting, by the way. Kwame Nkrumah already was talking about this, and this was in the 60s he was writing it, but it's has become even more apparent today, maybe to some of us. Anyway, then the Kwame Nkrumah mentions the capitalist scramble, which was not only the underdeveloped world, but in Europe in its core as well. As he noticed, Alsace-Lorraine was coveted prize of the German invasion of France, and then France got it back and so on. And then there was like something called what became EU at this time was back then European Common Market, right? And the European Common Market was actually spearheaded by some major corporations in Europe. So in reality, this is also one of the things that, yeah, yeah, and this is what we, people who have a very, good analysis of this situation, they will know that yes, EU is basically a corporate dumping ground. Second, let me invite one who also wants to. Yeah, somebody was calling me, and he's also here, but I think we can just continue. So, where did we come? Yeah, corporate interest is what actually started the European Common Market, which was the forerunner for EU, European Union, right? Yeah, so interesting perspective here, which again, foresaw a lot of the phenomena that we have today. A lot of things have actually not changed, and a lot of things that have changed, Kwame Nkrumah has already predicted, as we will see later in this chapter. So if we turn to page 41, Kwame Nkrumah begins to talk about how the United States, because of its late joining of war and physical immunity, achieved head start, which he already mentioned before, and that the United States took over Britain as the main as the main front runner in the monopoly of capital in this world. And this created a new phasing of capitalism. And in this new phase of capitalism, there seems to be like, with all the different countries gaining independence and so on, it seems, like a new era. But in reality, this just created, as we all talk about all the time, the phenomenon of neo-colonialism. Um, but of course, like what do you call it? Kwame Nkrumah stresses that this didn't mean that old colonial empires or old imperialist countries didn't cling to their colonies. They actually did. And but with with this new phase, they even had an even more powerful, you could call it neutral force, that was USA, who was supporting them, which meant that they even didn't have to lift a finger to do anything, or to, even if there was de jure independence of a lot of countries, de facto they were kind of still controlled by France, Portugal, yeah, United Kingdom or Britain, and so on. When we turn to page 42, are you following me, by the way, sister? Good. So in page 42, we get to know about the anti-communism used as an excuse to exert political influence in different parts of the world. Von Krugman mentions Cuba as an example of extreme length that the USA, for example, took with them. And that was a strategic passion in the struggle for the renewal of dominion over the socialist anti-imperialist world. That's, by the way, that's a quote from the page. And then an interesting fact starts to appear, and that is the control of fuel prices that these, Western corporations were spearheading. And the Middle East already at that time was in the middle of like, the Western intervention already at that time. This is back in the 60s, people have to remember. So this is before fuel was like, fuel was scarce as it is today. A lot of things was happening, and there was actually a lot of intervention in the Middle East, as Kwame Nkrumah mentions. And these examples are, yeah, not only in Middle East, there was Near East, Middle East, Far East, Latin America, and North Africa. There was a series of events in Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Aden, Saudi Arabia, Cuba, Venezuela, Brazil, Brunei, and Algeria. So there were a lot of different interventions in all these countries by the United States. And so you can see, you can again draw a parallel between at that time and today. And there's exactly no difference. The story might change a little bit here and there, but you can really see how things are really have not changed from that time to today, and with the control of oil in the Middle East and so on. And there was suppression of popular movements in Asia, Africa, and Americas. Asia, this includes, of course, Middle East, where there were also a lot of popular movements that got suppressed. And all these popular movements were, of course, about what? About, retaining their God-given wealth, if you want to call it, through, measures which we call socialism and so on. And if we turn to page 43, Kwame Nkrumah talks even more about the European common market that was apparently a dumping ground for international investments. So, yeah, America was basically using it more than it was, more than it was actually in the advantage of Europe, at least, to its full potential. And there was also another part of this stage of imperialism, which was collective imperialism, which we, today call NATO, or North Atlantic, or North, yeah, something like that, organization. Okay. Yeah, I just skimmed through this page, and if we go to page 44, Kwame mentions commercial sector and people's relations or public relations, sorry, you know, sectors coming to life, and these personalities, people like valuing some kind of personalities that actually have nothing to give to this world, but somehow are commercialized. So this capitalist class is pushing this idea of, oh, this person is something or whatever. And the capitalism became desperate and started to promote overconsumption because they need to always have constant growth and create surplus, or otherwise there's negative growth if there's no uh, growth, if you get me. And the countries of six were the ones who dominated the EU. The founders of EU were Germany, France, I think it was Luxembourg, Belgium, and I believe it was Italy, the last one. But anyway, if we or Netherlands, I think actually. But yeah, let's move on. If we move on to page 45, we start to talk. He starts to mention um that there is a European corporation, or yeah, European corporation, and there was like this man or whatever, Lord Burstein, chairman of M. Samuel and Company, at a 1963 annual meeting. I'm quoting, by the way, Kwame Nkrumah now, when he reported that the 16th 2 out of 3% acquisition of company's shares by the Morgan Group. And he, quote, this guy, will not be the first merchant bank to have part of its capital owned by American interests. So you can see America is already dominating the businesses even of these European countries who used to be, what do you call it? Who used to be, wait, yeah, these European firms who used to be, what do you call it, dominating the world. Now they're all of a sudden dominated by America or American corporate interests, which you know kind of give a little bit of imperial spoils to America and so on. We all know that corporations are what runs America and so on. Yeah, let's see here. Uh, but even though there was like this, what we call international co-fraternity of different capitalist powers, there was still, some inter-imperialist rivalries that there were in France, which, France has expressed itself in General de Gaulle's stand on an individual French nuclear striking force. And actually, there's even, I mean, yeah, it doesn't say it in this book, but America attempted a coup in France after World War II, which some might not even know. So this is very interesting stuff in this imperialist world. Like, they all seem friends, but on many key issues, they actually disagree. And you can also see it in actually France that is supporting one today, with France supporting one camp in Libya, while America is supporting the other side in the Libyan civil war. So yeah, interesting that they seem all, friendly with each other, but they have like some key things that they actually disagree with each other on. I hope you're following. So let's go to page 47 down in the last part. Yeah, so there's like this phenomenon in this, capitalist unequal balance where profit goes to the developed world more than it goes to the underdeveloped countries. And underdeveloped, we mean, of course, the periphery of the capitalist world, right? The ones who are poor, they're actually, not getting anything out of what they produce or the goods or the services because they are quote unquote not considered good quality or whatever. Yeah, let's just skip to page. We were at what page 49, right? Yeah, so if we skip to page 50, there we can see that there's like Kwame Nkrumah again predicts something with this NGO phenomenon that a lot of people actually don't know about. In the global south, a lot of people are very aware of the NGO phenomenon. And what we mean by NGO phenomenon in this case, when it comes to neocolonialism, is how this is like a new way of weaponizing aid, weaponizing human rights, for example, today also to use it in a new colonial form. And this was back in we're talking about 1960s again. Today, this has advanced much further, as we both know. And like, what do you call it? Kwame Nkrumah mentions B. Chango Machio, who wrote the book Aid and Neocolonialism. And here, Kwame Nkrumah also mentions that UN, USSR are non-aligned, and the West have their separate definitions of aid, right? And he mentions specifically two definitions: the UN definition and, of course, the Western definition. And you can see clearly what how their different perspectives, differ. UN, which is the body of different international countries, all the countries in the world, of course, would have a more quote unquote universal interpretation of it, where it says the UN definition of aid says that it's grants, long-term lending, and non-military purposes. Non-military, of course, is hard to specify, but it's in quotation marks. And then there's the Western definition, or what we call the developed countries, or the aid. What was it? What is it he called it? The the aid providers, or whatever you want to call it. I forgot the word. But yeah, so the Western definition of aid is, of course, yeah, NGOs, of course. But I was more mentioning, let's see here. Yeah, aid-giving countries. That's what it called. Aid providers. Yeah, it's the same thing. Anyway, so the West interprets aid, and this is interesting actually. And this is actually the last part of this chapter is private capital investment. Okay, how is that aid, right? Investment. Interesting. Export credits, and loans for military. All this, what does it have to do with aid? Like, does it make sense that this is aid? Um, I don't think so, but apparently that's the new interpretation apparently of it. So today, aid is just a foreign investment, is what Kwame Nkrumah was insinuating at that time. And now today we can see with NGOs, which are both, aid groups, and then there's like different, whatever you want to call it, political groups, and you might want to ask yourself, what does a non-governmental organization in quotation marks, like, how does it work with politics? That makes no sense, especially when they are, sponsored by and, paid by actual governments with money, and they do things that are political, that are different than, the countries that they are operating in. Anyway, this was a very interesting chapter, all in all, imperialist finance. So yeah, do you have anything you want to add or ask or anything, sister? Hello? Oh wait, let's see here. I'll just go into the what do you call it? Discord. Okay. Yeah. So what were you saying? Sorry. Yeah, the surplus growth, which goes against their idea of scarcity. Yeah, right. Yeah, they have an idea of, oh, there's scarcity, but there's also surplus. Like what? So there's infinite growth or there's no infinite growth? Like can like that's also like an oxymoron, right? or what you would, yeah, paradox, you could call it maybe even. Yeah, that's another interesting fact. Like, I mean, the fact that yeah, they have actually only indebted even more. They have put interest rates, huge interest rates on these different African countries, who, by the way, are 10 times poorer per capita, at least. We're talking at least. It's much more, I can assure it's around maybe even 20%. They're 20% much more, what do you call it, poorer, these African countries, but still they're putting insane amounts of interesting rates on these, loans or whatever. And yeah, they're accusing other countries of, doing, what do you call it, debt trapping or whatever, they're but they are forgiving, right? So actually, yeah, it's very interesting how, this aid that they call, and what Kwame Nkrumah actually, pointed out to, that in the Western terminology, aid is, and this is how US defines it, for example, private capital investment, export credits, and lo loans for military purposes. How is that aid? When you grew up as a human, did you ever see that as an aid? No, you didn't. Yeah. And yeah, so what else do we have? What else? Yeah, and China did forgive like a record amount of what do you call it? Debt. And I think actually it was shared in uh, some of the channels actually. Like 32 countries have completely been forgiven their debt. And actually they even got the poorest African countries actually they even what do you call it? Yeah, they actually, yeah, the West actually is aiding itself even though they're super rich. How can they be so cheap, anyway, so yeah, so China like has forgiven a lot of the poorest countries in Africa, have been forgiving a lot of their debts. And plus China reduced tariffs on these poorest countries, so now they can, they can export their products without any tax, like, and that's actually that's pretty socialist, what do you call it, like that's only something a socialist country would do, right? Like the poor, granting the poorest countries uh you know access to more market, and getting giving them basically that they can just export their stuff without any tariffs, which means that the poorest countries can be advanced much better. Yeah, imagine the West doing that. I've never heard of that before, right? Yeah, even though China is forgiving that, and they give small loans, yeah, private companies that always have mentioned to Western companies, nations. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and these private companies, a lot of the times they're just owned. I mean, it's pretty easy for a multi-billion, or in today even trillions dollar companies to buy up a company that is worth only millions or even a few billions, and not, 100 billions. It's too easy to buy up these companies, so they just do it, especially in the poor countries, so they can even exploit them even more. Yeah, and it's true, yeah, they are aiding themselves. Is there anything else you would like to add, Dalia? Okay, perfect. Well, anyway, it was very short today. I thought, it was just good to kickstart the book reading, all in all, it's becoming a bit late for me. I have to go studying tomorrow, but I hope it was, kind of productive, to discuss a book together. I think it's always interesting to read together. I think it's more interesting than to read alone, especially a book that is like this, this kind of book where it's a lot about statistics, and it's actually he uses a pretty concise language, and even, it makes sense in our modern terms. It's not like reading like, Marx or something like that. It's kind of concise. But what I'm saying is like, it's 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 refreshing to just read a book together, if you get me. Yeah, it's really amazing actually, especially when the book is written in the 60s. It's insane how relevant this book is. Yeah, you're right, you're right. I wish a lot of other people could see that, you know. Well, if only they could. Um, and you know, I know a lot of people who actually have read this book, but they actually surprisingly cannot make the connection between the book and what's happening in the 60s there and to today. It's like, I don't know, like it's almost like we need to refresh people's minds, right? Yeah. Ah, it's insane. And yeah, so the people out there, when Kwame Nkrumah wrote this book, he was actually making a homage to uh, Lenin's book called yeah, what was it called? Capitalism, the high stage, no, Imperialism, the high stage of capitalism, right? So I would refer you to read that book. It's very short. It's like one third of this book. So yeah, if you want to get a background knowledge for why exactly capitalism leads to imperialism, you know, like at an excessive rate as it is today, right? Yeah. And yeah, do you have anything else to add, sister? Yeah, it's insane. I mean, yeah, the West is still dominating in the world. And people have this idea that some people at least have this idea that either they're okay to exploit because quote unquote they're democracies, which again that can be, you know, discussed. As Kwame Nkrumah has mentioned, you know, for them democracy is just a buzzword to use in order to fight their wars or invade other countries or subverting them or intervening in them in any way possible if they don't listen or follow the steps of the West. But we already know this. But anyway, Dalia, it was if you have any questions, ask me. Um, I I hope it was sufficient enough. Sorry, I was rushing through the chapter today. I can at another time read through the whole chapter with you if you'd like. But I thought we agreed, you know, last time that we would, you know, just read through a summary of the book or skim it through together. And yeah, if you have anything to add, please let me know now. Otherwise, yeah, I can just stop it and we can maybe have like a couple of more sessions through the week, you know, without it taking a lot of our time, you know, just writing a summary of the book, or I can write a summary. You can just skim through the book with me if you want. It depends what you like. Yeah, yeah, and if you feel you don't have time to make notes, that's also fine. I can also read through the chapter because for now it was just you and me. Sometimes there are other joining, you know, so yeah. So is it okay we end this session for today? I'm just gonna pause at least the recording for now. Anyway, whoever is listening out there, thank you for listening to this book reading session. And yeah, uh, thank you very much for participating and goodbye.